At 67 years old, I thought I had faced every kind of loss life could throw at me. I was wrong. One stormy afternoon, a tornado took my home in Maple Ridge, Kansas, the house where I had raised my son and buried my husband's memories. And when I drove to my son Evan's doorstep, hoping for comfort and safety, I was met with words that cut deeper than any storm. We need privacy. My girlfriend does not want you here. My name is Pauline Mercer, and this is not only a story about destruction, but about how love can return when you least expect it. When my own family closed the door, I reached for a number I had carried for 50 years, a faded card with the name of my first love, Graham Ellison. Nobody knew I still had it. I never thought I would call. But in that moment, alone with 3 garbage bags and a borrowed car, I dialed. The man who picked up was not just a memory. He was alive, successful, and still had the same steady voice I remembered from high school. And when he came to find me standing in that parking lot with nothing left, he said 3 words that changed everything. You look beautiful. The afternoon began like any other Tuesday. I was in my kitchen in Maple Ridge, brewing tea the way I always did around Tres Bujos. The weatherman had warned about storms, but in Kansas that was nothing unusual. I had lived through dozens of spring tempests, but this time the sky shifted in a way that made my stomach twist. It turned a sickly shade of green mixed with black, a color I had never seen before. The air itself felt heavy, charged with something dangerous. At 3:15 the sirens wailed. Their pitch sliced through the calm of my kitchen. I grabbed the emergency radio and heard the words, "No one wants to hear." Large tornado on the ground moving northeast toward Maple Ridge subdivision. That was my neighborhood. 10 minutes, maybe less, to decide what I could save from an entire lifetime. My hands shook as I pulled an old suitcase from the closet. I filled it with the essentials of memory rather than survival. My wedding photo with Harold, our son Evan's baby pictures, my mother's pearl necklace, a few important documents, a handful of jewelry, 43 years of life reduced to what fit in one bag. The basement was dark, colder than usual, and I crouched in the corner, clutching Harold's worn sweater. The sound that followed was like a freight train tearing through the world above me. Wood splintered. Metal groaned. The house that Harold had once been so proud of struggled against forces far greater than nails and beams could withstand. And then silence. A silence so complete it made my ears ring. When I climbed the steps again, my legs felt weak. Where my living room once stood, there was nothing but sky. My rose garden looked as if a giant blender had torn it apart. The kitchen table, where Evan had done his homework, was jammed into the broken wall of the garage. I stood in the ruins of my life, and for the first time since Harold's funeral 8 years ago, I cried. The next morning I walked through the wreckage with an insurance adjuster, a young man who looked barely old enough to rent a car. He carried a clipboard, snapped photos with a digital camera, and never once looked me in the eye. To him this was routine. To me it was everything. After a short survey, he spoke 2 words that felt like a verdict. Total loss. I swallowed hard. What does that mean for me? He cleared his throat and pointed at numbers on his sheet. Your policy covers $120,000 on the structure. With depreciation and deductible, you are looking at maybe $90,000, maybe less. He said at the way a cashier announces the total at a grocery store. $90,000 to replace 43 years of living. I stared at the broken beams around me. $90,000 could not rebuild Harold's workshop. It could not replace my rose beds or the dining room where birthdays had been celebrated. It certainly could not give me back the feeling of safety that had vanished in one violent hour. I thanked the adjuster out of habit, though he had given me nothing but numbers. By the time Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, helped me load my few belongings into her car, I had accepted a truce I did not want. I had no home, just 3 garbage bags of clothes, 1 battered suitcase of photographs, and Harold's old toolbox that had somehow survived under a pile of debris. That was all. When Mrs. Patterson dropped me off, I sat in the borrowed car with my heart pounding. There was only one person I could call now. My son Evan, my only family left. I prayed he would open the door. Evan lived 45 minutes away in Overland Park, a neighborhood of wide streets, manicured lawns, and houses that all looked polished enough for magazine covers. Driving through felt like entering a world where nothing bad ever happened. My car smelled of mud and mildew, and I felt like an intruder carrying disaster into their perfect world. The house itself was beautiful, with white shutters and a red front door his girlfriend Sloane had picked. I hesitated on the porch with 3 bags at my feet. Before I could knock, the door opened. Evan stood there tall, composed, wearing the same cautious smile he used in business meetings. Behind him, Sloane appeared almost instantly, her blonde hair pulled into one of those effortless buns that cost more effort than they admit. She wore white jeans and a silk blouse, and her eyes never left the bags I carried. "Mom," Evan said, stepping aside. His voice held distance. I set my bags down in the spotless entryway, suddenly aware of the smell clinging to my clothes. Wet wood, mud, and something heavier. Destruction. "It is only temporary," I explained. "Just until the insurance clears and I find an apartment." Evan glanced at Sloane. In that silent exchange couples have, the decision was already made. "Let's sit and talk," he said, leading me into a living room so pristine it felt more like a showroom. White sofa, glass tables, windows so clean they disappeared. I perched on the edge, careful not to leave marks. Evan leaned forward, his tone rehearsed. "Mom, we need to be honest. Sloane and I value our privacy. We work long hours. This house is our sanctuary," Sloane added gently. "It is not about trouble. It is about space. You would be more comfortable somewhere else. An extended stay hotel, maybe," Evan nodded. "I could help with a few hundred to get you started." The words felt like a door closing. Not welcome. Not here. Not home. I drove away from Evan's house with tears burning behind my eyes, though I refused to let them fall until I was alone. Mrs. Patterson's borrowed car rattled as I parked in a Walmart lot on the edge of town. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange over rows of shopping carts and streetlights that flickered awake. This was not home, but it was the only shelter I had. That first night, I leaned the seat back, clutching Harold's toolbox like it could keep me safe. I barely slept. Every time a car pulled in or a security guard's truck rolled past, I froze, afraid they would notice the 67-year-old woman living out of a vehicle. By morning, my neck ached, my clothes smelled stale, and I could not bring myself to look in the mirror of the restroom where I washed my face. The second night was worse. My cash dwindled to less than $100. I bought a gas station sandwich that tasted like cardboard and loneliness. I brushed my teeth at McDonald's, avoiding the pity in strangers' eyes. Pride kept me silent, but inside I felt hollow. By the third night, shame had settled into my bones. I shuffled through my purse, searching for coins, and found something else instead. A faded business card, edges soft from decades of being carried. Graham Ellison, his name printed in blue ink, a number underneath I was not sure still worked. On the back, in my own 17-year-old handwriting, I had written 4 words. "Do not forget me." I sat there staring at that card, my heart pounding. I told myself it was ridiculous. 50 years had passed. He had surely built a life of silence stretched long enough for me to fear he did not remember. Then he said my name again softly, like he was touching a memory. "Pauline," the words tumbled out before I could stop them. My house was destroyed in the tornado. Evan does not want me with him. I have nowhere to go. I'm in a parking lot in Tulsa. "I'm sorry to bother you after so many years." He interrupted, firm but kind. "Tell me where you are. I am coming now." I tried to argue, but he only repeated himself. "Pauline, give me the address. I am already walking to my car." 2 hours later, a silver sedan pulled into the lot, moving slowly between rows of vehicles. My heart hammered as I recognized him the moment he stepped out. 50 years had added silver to his hair and lines to his face, but his storm gray eyes were the same. He walked with quiet confidence, scanning until his gaze landed on me. When he reached my window, he smiled and tapped gently. "Hello, Pauline." I rolled the window down, ashamed of my wrinkled clothes and tired eyes, but he looked at me with nothing but tenderness. "You look beautiful," he said, and for the first time in days, I let myself believe I was safe. Graham loaded my 3 garbage bags and Harold's old toolbox into the back of his car, as if they were treasures. He opened the passenger door for me, his movements calm, deliberate, leaving no room for argument. The drive felt unreal. We passed rolling hills and neat neighborhoods until we turned through iron gates marked Prairie Creek Way states. His driveway curved beneath tall oaks and ended at a stone house with wide porches. It was elegant, not flashy, a home built to last. He showed me to the guest wing. The bedroom was larger than my old living room, with windows overlooking gardens and a bathroom with a soaking tub. I stood awkwardly, afraid to disturb anything. Graham only smiled. "Make yourself comfortable, Pauline. This house has been too quiet for too long." The first week, I tiptoed through the halls like a guest, but Graham was patient. Slowly, we fell into a rhythm. In the mornings, he brewed coffee, while I sat on the porch watching finches dart among feeders. In the afternoons, we walked his property, where he showed me the greenhouse where he raised orchids. In the evenings, we cooked together. He moved easily around the kitchen, but when I prepared a pot roast from an old family recipe, he said it was the best meal he had tasted in years. No one had appreciated my cooking like that in a long time. One night by the fireplace, Graham told me he had once proposed to another woman, but called off the wedding. I asked why. He met my eyes and said simply, "Because it was not you." For the first time since the storm, I felt I could breathe again. It did not take long for Evan to notice that I was no longer calling from motel or shelters. One afternoon, my phone lit up with his name. "Mom, where are you staying?" Miss Paddleson said. "You left the extended stay place." I hesitated. "With a friend," I answered. "A friend?" His voice carried disbelief. "You do not have friends with money." I bit back the sting of his words and said calmly, "You would be surprised." From that moment, the calls came more often. At first, he asked polite questions about my health, but soon the conversation always drifted to Graham. "What kind of business is he in? How long have you known him? Does he have investments in Kansas City?" The curiosity was less about me and more about opportunity. Sloan joined the effort in her own way. Expensive candles arrived at the door, then gourmet chocolates, then a silk scarf. Each gift came with a card written in her careful hand. "So happy you have found love again. Hope we can start fresh." But every package felt like a peace offering with strings attached. Zero. At dinners, Evan tried to reinvent himself as the devoted son. He told stories of how grateful he had always been for my sacrifices, how he admired my strength. He smiled warmly, but his eyes kept straying to Graham, measuring him, weighing possibilities. I sat across the table listening, knowing it was revisionist history. Graham never called him out directly, but under the table he squeezed my hand, steady and reassuring. His quiet message was clear. "I see what is happening. You are not alone." One evening, Graham told me he had invited Evan and Sloan to dinner. His voice was calm but firm. "It is time we clear the air, Pauline." I spent the day anxious, unsure what he planned. When they arrived, Maria served a beautiful meal, and for a while, conversation stayed light. But once coffee was poured, Graham leaned back in his chair and spoke with a steadiness that left no room for doubt. "I want to talk about expectations," he began. "Evan, you have shown a new level of interest in your mother since she came to live here. You ask often about my business, my investments, my plans. But I remember the night Pauline had nothing and needed a place to stay. That night, you and Sloan said you needed privacy. You called this house your sanctuary. You closed the door on her." Evan shifted in his chair, his face flushing red. "That is not fair," he muttered. Graham's voice never wavered. "What is not fair is to treat your mother as a burden when she is struggling and as an asset now that she is secure. If you wish to be part of her life because you love her, you are welcome. But if you are here because of what you think you might gain, then you are wasting everyone's time." The room fell silent. Sloan stared at her hands, her lips pressed tight. Evan looked at me, then at Graham, his jaw clenched. For once, he had no practiced lines. Graham's words had drawn a line in the sand, a line that finally placed me at the center, not the edge of the story. 6 months after the storm, Graham asked me to marry him. There was no dramatic proposal, no ring hidden in champagne. He simply took my hands one morning on the porch and said, "Pauline, I do not want to spend another day without knowing you are my wife. My answer was yes. Before he finished the sentence, we chose a quiet ceremony in his back garden. The October air was crisp, the trees brushed with gold, and the sky clear as glass. I wore a simple blue dress, Graham said, matched my eyes. He wore a charcoal suit that made him look distinguished and strong. Our witnesses were Maria, the housekeeper, who had become a friend, and Thomas, his longtime business partner. Inviting Evan was the hardest decision. I told Graham I was unsure, but he gently reminded me, "He is your son. You will regret not giving him the chance." So I called him. "Evan, we are getting married on October 15th. You are welcome to come, but Sloan is not invited." His silence lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally he said, "Mom, you hardly know this man." I answered quietly, "I have known him longer than I knew your father when I married him." On the day of the wedding, Evan arrived alone. He was polite, reserved, and watched carefully. But when the minister pronounced us husband and wife, I felt lighter than I had in decades. This time, the vows were not about performance. They were about truth. After the wedding, life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and deeply familiar. Graham and I shared mornings over coffee, afternoons in the garden, evenings by the fire. For the first time in years, I hummed while cooking dinner. My heart lighter with every passing day. Evan began calling again, but his tone had changed. Instead of questions about Graham's business, he asked about my roses, about whether I had joined a book club, about how I was feeling. The conversations were shorter, less polished, almost genuine. It was not the closeness I had once dreamed of, but it was honest, and perhaps honesty was a stronger foundation than forced affection. Sloan disappeared from the picture. No more packages on the doorstep. No carefully worded cards. It was as if she had decided that if she could not control the situation, she would remove herself entirely. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was sad that her only connection to me had ever been through calculation. I looked at my son differently now. He was still the boy I had rocked through fevers, the young man I had supported through college. But he was also a man who had made choices that revealed his flaws and his limits. I could not rewrite him. All I could do was accept what he was willing to give and protect the peace I had finally found. When I look back now, I see the tornado differently. At first, it was pure destruction, ripping away everything familiar. But in time, I realized it had also cleared space for something new. Losing the house taught me what was load-bearing in my life and what was just decoration. Love, dignity, respect. Those were the beams that truly held me up.